Welcome to the podcast series The New Student Pharmacist, where we discuss chemistry and pharmacy, as well as leaders in pharmacy careers, community, and chemistry and pharmacy research. We encourage you to support the work we are doing and follow us on Spotify and Apple Podcasts by subscribing for free. Note, the views on the podcast represent those of my guest and I.
Purpose of these episodes not at all for advice or medical suggestions. These are aimed to provide support to peer pharmacists in training in educational and intellectually stimulating ways. Again, these are not at all for medical advice or medical suggestions. Please see your local board and state-certified health professional. The views of this podcast represent those of my guests and I.
Okay, so good morning, everyone. Welcome to the New Student Pharmacist Podcast. We're so glad you're listening today. Feel free to download and share this podcast. Here we discuss societal impact, research, science, and simply put, the science of change, as well as stories of resilience and impact on society. We're so happy you're tuning in. My guest today is Frank Figliuzzi, a senior national security and intelligence analyst at NBC News and former assistant director for counterintelligence, the FBI. With a distinguished career in public service and a commitment to integrity, Frank has valuable insights to share on resilience, leadership, and strategic communication. Frank, thanks for joining me today. His website is frankfigliuzzi.com, and he also has his latest book, Long Haul: Hunting the Highway Serial Killers. One of the points of focus for today will be election security and his work in terms of his government work and government experience. So today, let's begin. Frank, your career has spanned decades of significant changes in national security. How did you approach adapting the FBI's strategies in response to evolving threats? And also, what takeaways could you give to people who are trying to improve their craft? So in short, what strategies or what approaches that you used while you were in the FBI could be extrapolated for people as they seek to improve their craft?
Yeah, look, I view every American citizen as what I call a designated survivor. What do I mean by that? I mean that in my FBI career, I actually had a real designated survivor experience on the night of the State of the Union address in January 2012. It was my turn as assistant director to be the designated survivor for the FBI that night. When all the top government officials are in the Capitol, I was deep underground with a bunch of other agency representatives for the outside chance that something terrible would happen and that we would have to carry on the government. And I tell people, you are also that designated survivor. So be the one that protects and preserves freedoms and the Constitution. Be the one who votes early and gets it done. Be the one that calls out propaganda, disinformation, misinformation. Don't buy what you're seeing on social media. Get the facts. In fact, if you have to, put down that phone during the next few days before the election, because we're seeing an unprecedented threat online of deep fake videos and use of artificial intelligence. So we all need to be the eyes and ears. And God forbid, if you see or hear something that sounds like someone's on the pathway to violence toward the election, don't be the one who remains silent, right? Report what you're feeling.
Yeah, that's very important. I completely agree with you. being able to combat misinformation and disinformation, and also recognize. My question to you is, leading counterintelligence efforts is undoubtedly demanding. What mindset or principles help you maintain resilience in such a critical and high-pressure role?
A great question, because it happens to be addressed in my very first book, The FBI Way, Inside the Bureau's Code of Excellence, where I write about values-based performance under stress, right? The FBI, no matter how you feel about the FBI, you've got to acknowledge they deal with life and death issues every single day. They do get it right most of the time. And I study that in my first book. And the bottom line is this: when you've got your identified core values, what you are as a person, what you will do, what you will never do, whether it's a family you're leading, a little league team, or you're a CEO of a major business, I assert that if you operate on values and you identified a code of conduct that everybody gets and understands, and you clearly communicate it, you will perform better under high stress. That's the big takeaway from my book and from the lessons I've learned in my 25-year FBI career. But your team, your group, your organization, your family has to assimilate those same values. You've got to enforce those values. And I wonder, I have to tell you, as a nation, whether we have similar assimilated core values anymore, because we seem to have gone off in very separate directions. That concerns me.
So yeah, it's interesting you bring up this concept of values, because I'm also someone who's really adamant about my values, my faith perspectives, and all those other types of things. So what do you think can contribute to us coming back on track if you perceive us to be a little bit off course? What do you think? Do you think it's us putting more emphasis on our civic advocacy, so like really participating in elections to influence policy, or do you think it's a multi-pronged approach in which we're advocating for civic change, advocating for personal change, personal growth, advocating for improvement in family life? And what do you think would contribute us starting the journey to coming back on track?
Yeah, I'm very concerned about this and whether it's even possible. I'll be honest, I try to be optimistic, and I think we will come through this period of history, but I don't know how long this period is going to last, where we're deeply divided. I started questioning whether we're still teaching civics in schools, whether we're teaching history properly, whether we understand what's happened globally with regard to fascism, with regard to Nazism, because history absolutely repeats itself. And when I started seeing what happened on January 6th at the Capitol and the violence against police officers and the property damage and the attempt to overturn an election and the peaceful transfer of power, one of the first questions I asked myself was, are we still teaching civics and what it means to run a democracy anymore? So the part of this answer, and it's multi-pronged, as you said, is at the education system getting back on track and understanding our core values as a nation. This plays into whether we can be resilient. I mean, if we had another 9/11 attack, would we immediately start getting political and start blaming it on somebody, or can we unite as a country? We had a global pandemic that was killing millions of people around the world, and we couldn't agree on whether or not to wear a mask. We were fighting each other. How can we be resilient? We've got to get back on track. We've got to teach the right values. Social media has been a huge negative in this regard, because it simply gets us into these echo chambers that we never get out of. We never get up and see sunshine and start getting other people's opinions. We've got to listen to our fellow citizens and try to understand where they're coming from.
Yeah, I agree with you. I completely agree with you. Yeah, what you're saying is completely correct. So effective security involves collaboration with diverse stakeholders. How do you foster strong partnerships within and outside of your work to address complex challenges?
Yeah, I mean, part of that is seeking diverse opinions. If you automatically dismiss people, so I'll give you an example in my own life. I've met people, neighbors, hey, what do you do for a living? Oh, I'm an analyst on NBC News. Oh, I don't listen to NBC News. I'm not allowed to. It's fake news. Okay, so look, we've just said hello for the first time, right? And you're dismissing what I do for a living. That's bad. That's not good. I make an effort in my life to listen to all opinions. I watch Fox News because I want to understand the other side of the equation. And you've got to do that. Learn what your neighbors are thinking and show some acknowledgement of where they're coming from.
Yeah, making space for differences and making space for diversity in opinions, recognizing that no one knows everything. We all have each day is a gift and an opportunity to learn not just about yourself but about other people. I completely agree with you on that. So in terms of uncertainty, I'm always impressed with some of the armed services and government officials that I meet. It always points me to this question. What drives you? What keeps you going? You have done a lot. You're currently doing all these things with NBC News. What gets you going and keeps you going? Is it like a perspective, a belief system, a core set of fundamental values, a mission statement? What keeps you going, Mr. Figliuzzi?
Yeah, I appreciate the question. Look, I view, even though I am quote unquote retired, 25 years in the Bureau, I view my mission and my oath as continuing. So the work I'm doing now is writing, speaking, being an analyst on national television is an extension of my mission and an extension of my oath. And so people who think, well, you must come from this particular side of the political aisle if you're doing this or doing that or opposing this or that. I'm not. I'm actually above that political fray in my mind because I am the national security guy. I am identifying threats and calling them out and offering ways to mitigate them. So I view that as my continued mission and part of the reason why I'm here, to simply continue the mission.
Okay. Yes, I understand. I understand that continuity is something that gives you drive. So, how do you maintain a clear vision and guide others through moments of unpredictability and uncertainty? What are some of the key milestones and key pillars of thought that you employ when you are in moments of unpredictability and uncertainty?
Yeah, thanks for asking. That too is part of my book, The FBI Way. The book, each chapter of the book starts with the letter C. I call it the 7 C's of performing under high stress. And the last chapter of the book, I deliberately chose the title of consistency. So when you're under severe stress, often it's human nature to say, hey, I've never seen this happen before. There's got to be some new, different way of doing things. I've got to figure out some new way of doing this. And that's wrong. It's under severe stress when you have to double down on what got you to where you are, on the values and the protocols and the practices. So the quick example I give in my book on that chapter is when we had the first anthrax murder in the history of the United States at Boca Raton, Florida. I was put in charge of that crime scene. It was the first murder in history by anthrax. And we could have thrown up our hands and said, this has never happened before. We have to go inside a building filled with deadly anthrax spores. We have to suit up in hazmat suits. This is, we don't know what to do. But instead, we simply asked a couple of questions. Are we good at crime scenes? Yes. Have we been trained to operate in a hazmat environment? Yes, we have. Are we good at murder scenes? Yes, we are. We're the FBI. So we can do this. And I think as a nation, we are also under severe stress right now. We have to ask ourselves, is it time to throw out democracy? Is it time to throw out the rule of law? 3 equal branches of government? Is there some new way of doing this? I think the answer is no. Stick with what got us here and double down on it, and you'll get through it.
Oh, that's powerful. That's very powerful. It's a concept that, answer's not always in the novelty, but it's in your ability to be consistent, the ability to employ values, to employ strategy, and be consistent with that strategy. That's a very powerful concept. Very, very powerful. So who were some of your mentors who guided you in your journey, if you had any, and what role did mentorship play in helping you persevere through tough decisions and critical moments?
Yeah. So first, look, we've got to start with how we were raised, and I do in the first chapter of the FBI Way talk about being raised in a home where it was instilled in me that the world is filled with good and bad, and you have to be on the side of good, and you've got to identify the bad and filter out what should not be a part of your life. And so that, with being raised like that, I knew I wanted to get into justice work, and I eventually decided I wanted to go to law school and learn the law, and then enforce the law. And I had opportunities to practice the law, but I said, you know what, I want to actually be on the street fighting this battle, and I joined the FBI, and that's been everything to me. In terms of mentors throughout my career, there have been leaders who taught me how to be a great leader. And you learn things about, things that you won't do as a leader too. You have some bad leaders, and you have to learn from them, right? You tend to dismiss a not great leader, but then you should ask yourself, what is it that's not making this person the great leader? So I've had both, and learned from that as well.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. I think you also bring up another concept, being teachable, recognizing that even in experiences that may not be comfortable, those uncomfortable experiences could be crucible for your own development, and then also this idea that, the person may not be operating in a way that you may deem appropriate, deem right, but even in that, one of the things you do, you identify the bad and recognize that as I move forward in my own leadership development, those are some of the traits that I will not exhibit because I recognize those are bad from my own experience. Yeah, that's very good. What advice would you offer to young professionals who aspire to pursue leadership roles, particularly in fields where adaptability and resilience are crucial?
Yeah, I worry today that, and I don't want to paint an entire generation with anything because it's just not accurate, but I worry about resilience today. We already talked about breaking out into fights over masks during the COVID pandemic, and we're seeing fights break out now at election places. I just saw something yesterday at a place, and we can't do that. We've got to build young people who can face adversity. Let them face adversity. If you're a parent of young people, don't be that helicopter parent that's standing over them constantly. Let them experience some losses and get back in there and not quit the basketball team or not quit the piano lessons, whatever it is. Help them to stick with something until the end and adapt the idea of losing and coming back from that. That's something I think we're going to miss if we're not careful. Sticking to core values, knowing your core values, and sticking with them constantly, and checking yourself and being accountable to somebody else. Have somebody in your life who you can say, hey, did I do this right? Could I do this better? That's really essential as well.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. Having feedback for people to give you advice and also give you responses on how you're doing personally, professionally. Yeah, so I completely agree with you on that. And also, you bring up an important point. Resilience is tied to being realistic. You're recognizing the issues at hand and really dealing with the stresses, seeing how they're impacting you and getting the help when needed. So thank you so much, Mr. Figliuzzi. And for all those listening, make sure you go out there and whoever you vote for, make sure you vote and vote for a choice that's aligned with your values. So thank you, Mr. Figliuzzi. Once again, this is Frank Figliuzzi, a senior national security and intelligence analyst at NBC News and a former assistant director for counterintelligence at the FBI, where he served 25 years. During his tenure, Frank directed a series of investigations and briefed the highest levels of government. He is the author of The FBI Way Inside the Borough's Code of Excellence and frequently shares his insights on national security, integrity, and leadership. We were so honored to have you here today. Thank you again.
Thank you. Stay safe.
Purpose of these episodes not at all for advice or medical suggestions. These are aimed to provide support to peer pharmacists in training in educational and intellectually stimulating ways. Again, these are not at all for medical advice or medical suggestions. Please see your local board and state-certified health professional. The views of this podcast represent those of my guests and I.
Hey there, future biostatisticians.
Ooh-wee.
I know that biostats exam has got to feel like a monster.
It does, right?
Lurking around the corner,
Oh, yeah.
ready to pounce with t-tests and p-values.
All those formulas.
But you know what?
What?
We're the monster slayers here,
We are here to help.
and we're going to help you conquer this beast.
Yeah, we've got all your class notes, your cheat sheets.
Yeah.
We're going to, break it all down.
Distill it down.
Make, a supercharged study guide.
Yeah, think of this deep dive as your secret weapon
Your secret weapon.
to really understanding what's behind those formulas and all that statistical jargon.
Right, because it can feel like a whole other language sometimes, right?
Oh, it totally does.
All the symbols and everything.
Okay, so let's start by understanding this whole hypothesis testing thing.
Hmm?
What is it really all about? Because it feels like every other page in my notes is a different test.
Right. There are a lot of different tests out there.
Yeah.
But they all come down to the same idea. It's all about answering a question
Okay.
about your data.
Okay.
So think of it like you're a detective
Fuck.
looking for clues to solve a case.
I like that.
So you're gathering evidence
Uh-huh.
to either support or reject your initial hunch,
Okay,
your suspicion.
got it.
And we call that initial hunch the null hypothesis.
Okay, so how do we even know which test to use?
Yeah.
Because there's the chi-square ANOVA, man.
Yeah.
It's making my head spin.
Right. It's a lot.
It is.
But don't worry. There's a method to the madness.
Okay.
I see you have this handy table in your notes.
I always keep my notes handy.
Good. It's like a cheat sheet
All
for
right.
choosing the right test.
Okay.
It summarizes the purpose of each test,
Okay.
the types of variables you're looking at,
Great.
and the kind of analysis it does.
Okay.
This table is going to be your best friend
I believe it.
when you're facing down a mountain of data.
All right, so first up, let's tackle the t-test.
Okay.
My notes mention paired and independent t-tests.
Yes.
What's the difference?
So paired t-tests,
Okay.
think of those as comparing before and after pictures.
Uh-huh.
You're looking at the same group
Right.
at two different points in time.
So,
For example, you could use a paired t-test
okay.
to see if a new drug actually changes blood pressure levels
Okay, yeah.
by comparing measurements before and after treatment.
Got it.
So you're looking at each person
Okay.
compared to their own baseline.
Okay, that makes sense.
And because you're controlling for individual differences,
Uh-huh.
paired t-tests can be very powerful for
Yeah.
detecting those subtle changes.
Interesting.
Now, independent t-tests,
Okay.
those are a different story.
Okay.
Here you're comparing two separate groups
Got it.
to see if there's a difference between them.
So, what?
You could use that
Yeah.
to compare the average height of men and women,
Okay.
two separate groups.
Okay, so paired t-tests are for before and after.
Yeah.
Independent t-tests are for comparing two separate groups.
Yes, exactly.
So if I wanted to see if a new teaching method improved test scores,
Uh-huh.
I would use a paired t-test
Yes,
to compare the student scores before and after
you got it.
implementing the new method.
Exactly.
Okay, cool.
Now, here's a little tip for your exam.
Okay, love these.
Always keep in mind that these tests have assumptions
Assumptions. Yeah, I was just going to say,
about the data.
yeah, what kind of assumptions?
So things like the data being normally distributed.
Okay.
That's really important.
Okay, so like bell curve.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
Crown it.
My notes mention homogeneity of variance.
Yeah.
What in the world does that even mean?
It's a really fancy way of saying that the spread of the data
Okay,
in each of those groups
okay,
should be about the same.
okay,
It should be similar.
okay,
And don't get too bogged down
Yeah.
with all those technical details for the exam.
okay.
But remember that checking these assumptions is important
Yeah.
to make sure that your results are reliable. So it's like making sure you have a good foundation
Yes, exactly.
before you start building a house.
Exactly. You want to make sure it's solid.
Foundation checked.
Yes.
Okay, so we've conquered t-tests.
We did it.
What's next on our biostats adventure?
All right, let's level up
Okay,
to ANOVA,
okay,
which stands for Analysis of Variance.
okay, I've seen that.
It's like a t-test on steroids.
Whoa, okay.
So we use ANOVA when we want to compare the means
Yeah.
of 3 or more groups.
So if I wanted to compare the effectiveness
Uh-huh.
of 3 different types of pain relievers, I would use ANOVA.
Exactly.
Okay,
So let's say you have 3 groups of people
okay,
with headaches.
right,
One group gets aspirin,
okay,
one group gets ibuprofen,
got it.
and one gets a placebo.
Yeah. the control.
Right. ANOV will tell you if
Ah.
there's a significant difference in pain relief among the three groups.
Okay, this is where my notes get a little fuzzy.
Okay.
They mentioned something called post-hoc tests.
Yes.
What are those?
Great question.
Thanks.
So NOV tells you if there's any difference
Right.
between those groups,
Right.
but it doesn't tell you which groups are actually different.
Oh.
So post hoc tests are like detectives that come in to solve the mystery, to figure out exactly where those differences lie.
So Inovia throws a party,
Yes.
and post-hoc tests are the guest list.
I like that analogy.
Thanks.
So there are a bunch of different post hoc tests.
Oh, no.
Don't worry.
Hey.
Like Tukey's, HSD,
Yep.
Bonferroni correction.
Right.
They each have their own quirks.
Yeah.
They're better suited for certain situations.
Okay.
But for your exam,
Yeah.
it's helpful to be familiar with the names,
Oh.
the general ideas.
All right.
But don't stress too much about every detail of
Okay.
each one.
Got it.
Focus on understanding why we use them
Okay.
and what they tell us about our data.
That makes sense.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, so NOV is a powerful tool when we're dealing with more than two groups.
It's like a staple
Yeah.
in biostatistics,
Uh-huh.
especially in research clinical trials.
Okay. Yeah.
Now, ready to dive into the world of relationships between variables.
I'm ready. Bring it on.
All right.
What's next on our statistical journey?
Let's talk about correlation,
Uh-huh.
which is all about measuring
Ah.
how two continuous variables move together.
Okay.
It's like watching a dance.
Okay, I like that.
Are they moving in sync
Okay.
or are they doing their own thing?
All right, let's find out.
Okay. And the star of this show
Okay.
is the Pearson correlation coefficient.
I've heard of that.
It's represented by the letter R,
Oh, yeah. Oh.
and it tells us the strength and direction
Okay.
of the linear relationship
Right.
between those two variables that you're looking at.
Oh, yeah. I remember.
Yep.
It can range from like -1 to 1.
Exactly.
But what does that actually tell us?
So think of it like this.
Okay.
An R value of 1 means you have a perfect positive correlation. So as one variable goes up,
Yeah.
the other goes up
Okay.
in perfect lockstep.
Got it.
So a classic example is height and shoe size.
Okay, yeah.
Generally, taller people have larger feet.
Makes sense.
So an R value of -1 would mean the opposite.
Okay.
As one variable goes up, the other goes down.
So like exercise and body weight.
Exactly.
The more you exercise,
Uh-huh.
potentially your weight goes down.
Yes, generally, yes.
Okay.
That's a negative correlation.
Got it.
And an R of 0
Okay.
means there's no linear relationship at all.
So the variables are just doing their own thing.
Exactly.
Right.
It's like the number of cats you own
Yeah.
and
Yep.
your favorite ice cream flavor.
Okay, so faux tells us
Yes.
the direction and strength of the relationship.
Uh-huh.
But how do we know if that relationship is actually meaningful
Right.
and not just some random fluke?
Yeah, that's where the p-value steps in.
Oh, yeah, the p-value.
It helps us figure out if the correlation we're seeing is statistically significant. So it basically tells us how likely it is that we'd observe this correlation
Oh, yeah.
if there was actually no relationship between the variables
Right.
in the real world.
Got it.
So remember, we're looking for those small p-values?
Yeah, like less than 0.05
Typically, yes, less than 0.05.
to be confident that our correlation
Right.
is the real deal.
Exactly.
Okay, so Maud, that tells us about the relationship.
Yes.
The p-value tells us if it's actually meaningful.
Mm-hmm.
Is there anything else I should keep in mind about correlation for the exam?
Yes. Here's a golden rule of statistics.
Hit me with it.
Correlation does not
Isn't that?
equal causation.
Oh, yeah, I've heard that before.
Just because two variables are correlated
Uh-huh.
doesn't mean that one causes the other.
Right. It could just be a coincidence.
It could be other factors at play.
My professor was always drilling that into our heads.
For good reason.
Yeah.
It's a common mistake that people make
Uh-huh.
when they're interpreting statistical data,
Yeah, you don't want to fall into that trap.
especially on the exam.
Especially on the exam.
Now, what about R squared?
Ah, yes. R squared.
I see that popping up in my notes on correlation too.
Yes, or the coefficient of determination.
Okay.
It's a handy little measure
Okay.
that tells you how much of the variation in one variable is explained by the other.
Okay. Can you explain that a little more?
Sure.
Okay.
So if your R squared is 0.8,
Okay.
that means 80% of the variability in your outcome variable
Okay.
can be explained by that predictor variable.
Okay.
So the higher the R squared, the better our prediction.
Exactly. Okay.
It's a great way to assess
Yeah.
how well our model fits the data.
This is making a lot more sense now.
Good.
So we've covered t-tests,
Uh-huh.
ANOVA, and correlation.
Yes.
Is there anything else I absolutely need to know about relationships between variables?
Well, correlation helps us understand if two variables are dancing together.
Okay.
But what if we want to predict
Okay.
how one variable will change based on the other?
Oh.
That's where regression analysis steps in. Prediction. Huh.
Yes.
That sounds pretty powerful.
It is. Regression analysis allows us
Yeah.
to build equations
Yeah.
that can predict a continuous outcome variable
Okay.
based on one or more predictor variables.
Okay, so it's like
Yeah.
a statistical crystal ball.
Yes, exactly.
Okay,
Right.
sign me up for that.
Right.
Where do we begin with regression?
Let's start with the simplest form.
Okay.
Simple linear regression.
Simple linear regression.
Yeah. Imagine you want to predict someone's weight
Okay.
based on their height.
Okay.
So height would be your predictor variable.
Uh-huh.
Weight would be your outcome variable.
Got it.
So simple linear regression just creates an equation
Okay.
that describes that relationship.
So you could plug in someone's height
Exactly.
and get an estimate of their weight.
Yes.
Pretty cool.
Now,
Yeah.
how do we create this magical equation?
Right. That's the question.
My notes mentioned something about beta coefficients.
Oh, yeah. Beta coefficients.
Those are key to unlocking that predictive power of our regression equation.
Interesting.
So they represent the slope of the line
Okay.
in your regression equation,
No.
telling you how much the outcome variable changes
Okay.
for every 1 unit change
Okay.
in the predictor variable.
So in our height and weight example,
Yes.
the beta coefficient would tell you how much weight
Exactly.
is expected to increase for every inch increase in height.
You got it.
So the beta coefficient
Yeah.
tells us the strength and direction of the relationship,
Yeah.
just like the correlation coefficient.
Yes, but the beta coefficient goes one step further
Okay.
and it quantifies the amount of change
Got it.
in the outcome variable
Okay.
for every 1 unit change in the predictor variable.
So it's more specific.
Yes, exactly.
Okay, that makes sense.
Good.
But how do we know
Right.
if that predictor variable
Uh-huh.
is actually a good predictor of the outcome?
That's a great question.
Because maybe foot size is a better predictor of weight than height.
Maybe. So that's where hypothesis testing comes in again. Each beta coefficient in your regression equation
Okay.
has a p-value associated with it. So
Okay.
just like with the other tests, a small p-value
Yeah.
gives us confidence
Yeah.
that that relationship between the predictor and the outcome
Mhm.
is statistically significant.
Meaning it's not just by chance.
Exactly.
Okay, so we're looking for those small p-values again.
Yes.
Those are our green light to say, hey, this predictor variable is actually doing something.
Exactly.
And remember R squared
Yes.
from our correlation discussion?
Mm-hmm.
Well, it makes a comeback in regression analysis too.
It does.
In simple linear regression,
Yeah.
R squared tells you how much of that variation in the outcome variable
Mm-hmm.
is explained by the predictor variable.
Exactly.
So it's like a measure of
Yeah.
how well our model fits the data.
Uh-huh.
Higher R squared.
Yeah, yeah.
It means our model is doing a better job of explaining what's going on.
Exactly.
This is starting to click.
Good.
So simple linear regression
Yes.
helps us predict an outcome based on one predictor variable.
Right.
But what if we have multiple predictors?
Great question.
Like maybe we want to predict weight
Okay.
based on height, age, and activity level.
That's where multiple linear regression comes in.
Okay.
It allows us to consider the combined effects
All right.
of multiple predictor variables on the outcome variable.
So imagine trying to predict blood pressure.
Uh-huh.
You could include predictor variables like age, weight,
Yeah.
exercise habits, family history.
Exactly.
Wow, that's a lot of information to juggle.
It is.
How do we even interpret those beta coefficients when we have multiple predictors?
That's a great question.
Does each one tell us how much that particular predictor
Right.
influences the outcome regardless of the other predictors?
Well, not quite.
Okay.
Here's where things get interesting. In multiple linear regression,
Yeah.
each beta coefficient represents the change in the outcome variable
Okay.
for a 1 unit change in the corresponding predictor variable,
Okay.
holding all other predictors constant.
Holding all other predictors constant.
Yeah.
Could you give me an example?
Sure.
My brain is starting to feel a bit fried.
No problem.
Thanks.
Let's go back to that blood pressure example.
Okay.
If we're looking at age, weight, and exercise habits as predictors,
Uh-huh.
the beta coefficient for weight would tell you
Okay.
how much blood pressure is expected to change
Okay.
for every 1 pound increase in weight,
Got it.
assuming that age and exercise habits stay the same.
That makes sense.
Good.
So each beta coefficient tells us
Yes.
the unique contribution of that predictor.
Right.
independent of the other predictors.
Uh-huh.
It's like we're isolating the effect
Exactly.
of each predictor.
Yes.
One at a time.
You got it.
That's pretty neat.
It is.
And that's one of the most powerful aspects of multiple linear regression.
Exactly.
It allows us to tease apart the individual contributions
Yes.
of different factors and understand how they work together
Right.
to influence the outcome.
Yes.
This is starting to feel a lot less intimidating.
Good.
But I see something here in my notes about dummy variables.
Ah, yes. Dummy variables.
What are those?
So dummy variables.
Brian, why do we need them?
Uh-huh.
My professor mentioned something about using them for categorical variables.
You're right. Dummy variables are a clever way to handle categorical predictor variables.
Categorical predictors.
Yes.
You mean variables like gender or race.
Exactly.
Can't we just use their numerical codes directly in the equation?
That can be tricky.
Like 1 for female and 2 for male?
Yeah, because remember,
Okay.
our beta coefficients represent the change in the outcome variable for a 1-unit change
Yeah.
in the predictor variable.
Okay.
And with categorical variables, a 1-unit change might not have a meaningful interpretation.
Right. What does it even mean to have a 1-unit change in gender?
Right.
Yes,
Exactly. So dummy variables help us avoid that issue.
Okay, so how do dummy variables work their magic?
So we create dummy variables
Okay.
to represent each category
Okay.
within a categorical variable,
Uh-huh.
except for one category
Okay.
that serves as the reference category.
So for example,
Yes.
if we have a variable called education level
Okay.
with categories like high school, college, and graduate school, we would create 2 dummy variables,
Right.
one for college and one for graduate school.
Exactly.
And high school would be our reference category.
Yes.
Can't follow. So we're basically converting our categorical variable into a set of yes-no variables.
Exactly.
Like, is this person a college graduate? Yes or no?
Yes. Exactly.
And those yes-no variables
Right.
can then be included in our regression equation. But how do we interpret the beta coefficients for those dummy variables?
Good question.
It can't be the same as interpreting the beta for continuous variable,
Right.
like height or weight.
You're right. The interpretation is a little different.
Okay.
So the beta coefficient for a dummy variable tells us the average difference
Okay.
in the outcome variable between that category and the reference category,
Okay.
holding all other predictors constant.
Okay.
So for example, if the beta coefficient
Okay.
for the college dummy variable is positive
Uh-huh.
and statistically significant,
Okay.
it means that people with a college education have on average a higher value
Got it.
of the outcome variable
Okay.
compared to people with a high school education,
Okay.
all else being equal.
So we're basically comparing each category
Yes.
to the baseline of the reference category.
Exactly.
But what if we have a categorical variable with more than 2 categories,
That's a great question.
like race or ethnicity, for example?
It's the same concept. Okay. We just create more dummy variables.
Got it.
So if we have a race variable with categories white, black, Asian, and other,
Okay.
we would create 3 dummy variables.
Okay.
One for black,
Yeah.
one for Asian,
Yeah.
and one for other.
Okay.
And then white would be our reference category.
Got it.
The beta coefficients for those dummy variables
Okay.
would then tell us the average differences in the outcome variable
Okay.
between each racial category and the white category,
Good.
holding all other predictors constant.
It's all starting to make so much sense.
Good. I'm glad.
I feel like we've really cracked the code of regression analysis.
It's a powerful tool
It is.
for understanding relationships between variables
Yeah.
and making predictions.
All right.
And remember, practice makes perfect.
Always.
The more you practice applying these concepts to
Yeah.
real-world problems, the more comfortable and confident you'll become.
That's great advice.
So speaking of practice...
Yeah. Your notes mentioned something about interpreting SPSS output
They do.
for regression analysis.
Yes. And maybe we should walk through an example just to make sure I have this down packed.
Yeah.
Because those SPSS tables can be a little overwhelming.
Absolutely. Let's dive into those output tables and see how to extract that key information.
Yeah.
And interpret those results like a pro.
Well, let's do it. All right, let's tackle those SPSS output tables from my notes.
Okay.
I know they can seem intimidating at first,
Yeah, they can be a little scary.
but I have a feeling
Uh-huh.
you're going to make them crystal clear.
You bet.
Yeah.
So think of these tables like a detective's report.
Oh, okay.
They hold all the clues you need
Mm-hmm.
to understand your regression analysis.
Okay, so where do we even begin?
Right.
There are so many numbers and tables.
So first,
Okay.
focus on that model summary table.
Model summary.
It gives you a bird's eye view
Okay.
of how well your model fits the data.
And remember our friend R squared.
It's a star player in this table, too.
It is.
So a higher R squared means our model is doing a better job
Yes.
of explaining the outcome.
Exactly.
Just as we talked about before.
Like we said before, the closer it is to 1, the better your model is
Okay.
at predicting the outcome.
Got it. Now, what about that ANOVA table?
Okay.
I see right below the model summary.
Yes.
What's its role in this detective story?
So the ANOVA table tests whether your model
Here.
is statistically significant overall.
Okay.
It's basically checking if all your predictor variables together are doing a better job of predicting the outcome
Okay.
than just using the average outcome value.
So it's like seeing if your detective team is actually solving the case.
Exactly.
Or just wandering around aimlessly.
Exactly.
So we're looking for a small p-value
Yes.
in the ANOVA table
Uh-huh.
to tell us our model is on the right track.
Yes. That small p-value is like finding a key piece of evidence at the crime scene.
It gives us confidence that our model is actually
Yes.
revealing something meaningful.
Exactly.
Okay, that makes sense. Now on to, I think, the most exciting part,
Okay.
the coefficients table.
Yes.
This is where we get all the nitty-gritty
You got it.
details about each predictive variable, right?
Yes, this table is like the detective's case file
Oh,
on
yeah.
each suspect.
I like this.
It lays out all the evidence,
Okay.
the beta coefficients, standard errors,
Okay.
T statistics,
Right.
and those all-important p-values.
So we're looking for beta coefficients
Yes.
that are far from zero
Uh-huh.
and have those tiny p-values.
Exactly.
That tells us those variables are the real culprits,
Yes.
influencing our outcome.
You nailed it.
Awesome.
A beta coefficient, far from zero, means that predictor has a strong relationship
Okay.
with the outcome
Uh-huh.
and a small p-value,
Yep.
usually less than 0.05.
Okay.
Gives us that statistical confidence that the relationship isn't just a coincidence.
It's like we're putting together a puzzle.
Yes.
We look at the overall picture
Mm-hmm.
with R squared and the ANOVA table,
Exactly.
and then we zoom in on the details of each predictor
Yeah.
with the coefficients table.
That's a fantastic way to put it.
Okay.
And remember,
Yeah.
once you've deciphered those beta coefficients from the coefficients table,
Yeah.
you can actually plug them in to your regression equation
Okay.
to make predictions
Oh.
about new data.
Oh, but so it's like having a custom-made formula
Exactly.
for predicting the future.
That's a great way to think about it.
Wow, this has been an incredible journey
Yeah, it has.
through the world of biostatistics.
Yes, it has.
We've gone from t-tests to ANOVA
Uh-huh.
to correlation and regression,
Yes, we have.
and I feel like I've gained a whole new level of understanding
You've definitely mastered
thanks to you.
some key concepts here.
Yeah.
Remember,
Okay.
understanding the logic behind these tests
Yeah.
is more important than memorizing formulas.
For sure. Think about each test as a tool in your biostatistics toolbox.
Okay.
Each tool is designed to answer specific questions
Uh-huh.
and help you unravel the mysteries
Okay.
hidden within your data.
That's a great way to think about it.
Good.
I feel much more prepared to face that biostats exam now.
I think you are.
Thanks to you.
You're welcome.
I'm no longer intimidated by those statistical monsters.
Good.
You've got this.
You do remember to practice.
Okay.
Keep those handy tables close by.
Will do.
And don't be afraid to ask questions.
Never.
And most importantly, stay curious
Always.
about the power of statistics to unlock insights
Yeah.
and make a real difference in the world.
Well, thank you for joining us
Of course.
on this deep dive into biostatistics.
It was my pleasure.
We'll catch you next time.
Sounds good.
Ready to
Thanks for
explore
listening
new
to the
statistical
podcast series, The New Student Pharmacist, where we discuss chemistry and pharmacy, as well as leaders in pharmacy careers, community, and chemistry and pharmacy research. We encourage you to support the work we are doing and follow us on Spotify and Apple Podcasts by subscribing for free. We are so glad that you were able to tune in today. Note: the views on the podcast represent those of my guest, and I take care and all